For 17 years, the boy touched his eye. Every doctor said the same thing. Nothing we can do. His father spent millions, flew to every corner of the earth, begged world-class specialists to look one more time. They all said blind forever. Then a homeless teenager, covered in dirt and sleeping in shelters, spotted something every expert had missed. And what he pulled from beneath Patrick's eyelid didn't just shock the billionaire. It exposed a secret that would destroy everything they thought they knew about trust, medicine, and miracles. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Thomas Smith was a billionaire. Private estates, luxury cars, more wealth than most families see in 10 generations. But his only son, Patrick, was born blind. 17 years old. Never seen a sunrise. Never seen his father's face. Never seen the world that his money could buy, but his eyes could not perceive. Thomas tried everything. Mayo Clinic, Switzerland, Singapore. Neurosurgeons who charged tens of thousands per consultation. Visual rehabilitation experts flown in on private jets. They ran scans, conducted procedures, tested experimental treatments. All of them said the same thing. Congenital. Irreversible. Accept it. But Thomas couldn't accept it. Because Patrick was all he had left. His wife, Florence, died the night Patrick was born. Complications during delivery. Too much bleeding, not enough time. Thomas held her hand as the light faded from her eyes, watched her lips move without sound, like she was trying to say something important. Just like their son would spend his life, silent in darkness, trying to communicate with a world that couldn't reach him. Thomas never forgave himself. If he'd chosen a different hospital, if he'd demanded better doctors, if he'd been more careful, maybe Florence would still be here. Maybe Patrick would be different. The guilt sat on his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He spent money. Millions of dollars. The best specialists on earth. Flights across oceans. Hotels that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. Every doctor gave the same verdict. Your son will never see. There's nothing more we can do. You need to let go. Let go. How could he let go of the only hope he had left? How could he accept that Patrick would live in darkness forever? Never knowing what his mother looked like, never seeing the faces of the people who loved him. So Thomas kept searching, kept writing checks, kept hoping that somewhere, someone had the answer. He didn't realize the answer wasn't coming from a specialist in a white coat. It was coming from someone society had thrown away. Someone he would never think to look at twice. Someone who was about to walk through his gates with nothing but the clothes on his back, and eyes trained to notice what everyone else refused to see. His name was James. And he was about to change everything. The Smith estate stretched across 50 manicured acres of pristine land. From the outside, it looked like something from a magazine. Stone columns, floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the afternoon light. Gardens maintained by a team of professionals who worked in absolute silence. But inside, the silence was different. Not peaceful. Not restful. Heavy. Suffocating. Like something had died long ago and no one had the courage to bury it. Servants moved through the marble hallways without speaking. Their footsteps were soft, calculated, trained. They'd learned quickly. Mr. Smith preferred quiet. No music played in that house. No television noise. No laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a father was drowning. Thomas Smith sat in his study most evenings, staring at the family portrait above the fireplace. There she was, Florence, his wife. Her smile frozen in oil paint, her eyes still warm, still full of life. Next to her, a younger version of himself, standing tall, looking whole. And between them, Patrick, barely 3 years old when the portrait was painted. Before Thomas understood that his son would never see his mother's face. Florence died the day Patrick was born. The doctors called it complications. Thomas called it his failure. If he'd chosen better care. If he'd been more vigilant. If he'd demanded more attention. Maybe she'd still be here. Maybe Patrick would be whole. The guilt never left. It became part of his breathing, woven into every decision. Every dollar spent chasing impossible cures. So he kept searching, kept flying to distant countries, kept hoping that somewhere, someone had an answer that made sense. He didn't know the answer was already on its way. Walking through his front gates on a cold afternoon in November, with torn shoes, a dirt-streaked face, and nothing to lose, James arrived at the Smith estate on a Tuesday. The sky was gray, heavy with the kind of clouds that promised rain but never delivered. He stood at the gates, staring up at the mansion, his stomach twisting into knots. This was it. His last chance. He'd been homeless since he was 13, for years of shelters, street corners, stolen meals, and cold nights under bridges. He'd lost his little sister to the system 2 years ago when social services separated them. She was the only family he had left, and now she was gone, placed with a foster family he'd never met. James had spent years running from group homes, running from adults who asked too many questions, running from a past that felt like it was always one step behind him, ready to swallow him whole. But running didn't pay, and survival required money. The charity organization had offered him this temporary work at a private estate, cleaning duty for a week, maybe 2 if he kept his head down. The pay was decent, enough to get him through the winter, maybe save a little for when he finally found Lily again. He didn't care about the mansion or the billionaire who lived inside. He just needed the paycheck. The head butler, Mr. Graves, met him at the service entrance. Stern face, sharp eyes, the kind of man who saw through lies before you even told them. "You're James." "Yes, sir." "You'll clean the event hall. You'll stay in the service quarters. You'll keep to yourself." Mr. Graves leaned in closer. "Mr. Smith doesn't like disruptions, especially around his son. Do you understand?" James nodded. "I understand." "Do you?" "Because the last boy we brought in thought he could be friendly, thought he could help. He was gone in 3 days." James swallowed. "I'm just here to work, sir." Mr. Graves studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Good. Follow me." As they walked through the mansion, James kept his eyes down. But he couldn't help noticing things. The silence, so thick it felt like walking underwater. The way the other staff moved like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, communicating in whispers. The heaviness that hung in the air, pressing down on everything. And then he saw him. A boy sitting alone on the marble staircase, arranging small objects in a precise line. Model airplanes, toy cars, books stacked by size. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge anyone passing by. His shoulders were hunched, his movements careful, methodical. But what caught James's attention was something else. The way the boy kept touching the corner of his right eye, just briefly, almost unconsciously, and the tiny wince that crossed his face each time he did. James's chest tightened. He'd seen that gesture before. His sister, Lily, used to do the same thing before he'd saved her sight. He didn't say anything, just kept walking. But his heart whispered something he couldn't ignore. Days passed in careful silence. James scrubbed floors, polished brass fixtures, wiped down windows that overlooked gardens he'd never be allowed to walk through. The work was simple, mindless, exactly what he needed. But the warnings never stopped. "Don't talk to the boy," Mrs. Henley, the head housekeeper, reminded him every morning. "Don't make eye contact. Don't wander into the family wing. Keep your head down," Mr. Graves added during inspections. "Mr. Smith has enough to worry about without staff getting ideas." Ideas. As if kindness was dangerous. James nodded, kept quiet, did his job. But he couldn't stop noticing Patrick. The boy moved through the mansion like a shadow, always alone, always touching walls and furniture to navigate, always stopping to tilt his head as if listening to something no one else could hear. And always touching that same spot beneath his right eye. James had been homeless since he was 13. For years of survival. For years of learning which shelter doors opened after dark, which soup kitchens didn't ask questions, which street corners were safe and which ones weren't. He'd run from his last group home the night they tried to separate him from Lily, his baby sister. 10 years old, scared of everything, clinging to his arm like he was the only solid thing left in the world. Social services said they couldn't stay together. Said James was too old, too troubled, too much of a risk. So he ran. For 2 years he kept her safe. Shared his food, found warm places to sleep, taught her how to stay invisible when the police drove by. Then one morning, he woke up in the shelter and she was gone. Taken. Placed in a foster home. A better environment, they said. James never stopped looking. Never stopped hoping he'd find her again. But surviving alone was harder than he thought. It happened on a Thursday. James was carrying a stack of folded tablecloths through the hallway when he turned a corner too fast. He collided with someone, and stumbled backward. Patrick. The boy stood frozen, his hands out instinctively, his face tense. "I'm sorry," James stammered, his heart pounding. "I didn't see." Patrick tilted his head, listening. Then softly he spoke. "It's okay. I can hear you breathing." James blinked. The boy's voice was quiet but steady. "Calm. Not angry. Not afraid. You're not upset?" Patrick shook his head slowly. "People always apologize. Like bumping into me will break me." A faint smile crossed his lips. "I'm blind, not fragile." Something in James's chest cracked open. Over the next few days they developed a rhythm. Small moments. Secret exchanges. James would pause in hallways where Patrick sat. Patrick would turn his head toward the sound of James's footsteps, recognizing them somehow. They didn't need many words. Patrick felt safe. James felt needed. It was the first time in years either of them had felt anything close to whole. One afternoon, James found Patrick sitting near a window, sunlight streaming across his face. The boy winced, then reached up and touched his eyelid. That same small, unconscious gesture. James froze. His breath caught in his throat. He knew that movement. Lily used to do the exact same thing. Right before James saved her sight. James watched. For 3 days, he watched Patrick move through the mansion, cataloging every wince, every careful turn away from windows. Every moment the boy's hand drifted toward his eye. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. Bright rooms made Patrick tense. Direct sunlight made him flinch. And whenever he touched that spot beneath his eyelid, his whole body went rigid, like he was bracing against invisible pain. On the 4th day, James found the courage to ask. They were alone in the sunroom. Patrick arranging puzzle pieces by touch. James pretending to dust nearby shelves. "Does it hurt?" James asked quietly. "Your eye." Patrick's hands stilled. For a moment he didn't answer. Then barely above a whisper. "Always." "What does it feel like?" Patrick's jaw tightened. "Like there's a burning grain of sand trapped inside. I can't blink it away. Can't wash it out. It's just always there." James's stomach turned. "Have you told your father?" "He knows. The doctors know. They've looked 100 times." Patrick's voice went flat. "They say there's nothing there. That I'm imagining it. That it's just part of being blind." James's hands clenched into fists. Part of being blind. That's what they'd told Lily too. Before James proved them all wrong. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Patrick was sitting near the tall windows in the library, his face turned toward the glass. The sunlight broke through the clouds at a sharp angle, flooding the room with golden light. Patrick jerked violently. His hand flew to his eye, pressing hard against it. His breath hitched, a sound caught between a gasp and a cry he refused to let out. James dropped the cloth he was holding and crossed the room in 3 strides. "Patrick." The boy's shoulders were trembling. James knelt in front of him. "Let me look. Please." Patrick shook his head, his hand still covering his eye. "They've already looked. They never find anything. I'm not them." Patrick's head tilted slightly, the way it always did when he was listening, really listening. "Please," James said again, softer this time. "Trust me." A long silence stretched between them. Then slowly Patrick lowered his hand. James's heart pounded as he leaned closer. He angled Patrick's face toward the sunlight, tilting his head just slightly, searching. At first, nothing. Then, there, deep beneath the lower eyelid, barely visible in the shifting light, a dark mass. Dense. Glistening. Unnatural. James's breath stopped. It was lodged so deep that unless you knew exactly where to look, unless the light hit at precisely the right angle, you'd never see it. But it was there. Real. Solid. Wrong. How had every doctor missed this? How had every scan, every examination, every specialist overlooked something so obvious? James felt fury rising in his chest, white-hot and suffocating. Patrick's voice broke through the silence, uncertain. What is it? James looked up, his throat tight. Patrick. His voice came out as a whisper. This shouldn't be here. Patrick's face went pale. And for the first time in 17 years, someone finally believed his pain was real. James couldn't sleep that night. He lay on the narrow cot in the service quarters, staring at the ceiling, seeing Lily's face in the darkness. She'd been 9 years old when it happened, playing in an abandoned lot behind the shelter, climbing a wooden fence that should have been torn down years ago. The splinter went deep, lodged beneath her lower eyelid so far back that when James finally got her to stop crying long enough to look, he almost missed it. But he saw it. A dark sliver of wood, pressing against tissue that had already started swelling. He took her to the clinic. Waited 4 hours. When they finally saw a doctor, the man barely glanced at her. It'll work itself out, he'd said dismissively. Keep it clean. Come back if it gets worse. But it did get worse. Lily's eyes swelled shut. She cried through the night. Started holding her head at strange angles, avoiding light. The clinic wouldn't see them again without payment up front. So James did it himself. Boiled water. Sterilized a pair of tweezers with a lighter. Held his sister's trembling hand and whispered prayers he wasn't sure anyone heard. When the splinter came free, Lily screamed. Then she blinked. And blinked again. Jamie, she'd whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can see you. That memory crashed into the present like a wave. Patrick's pain. The dark mass beneath his eyelid. The way every doctor had dismissed him. James pressed his palms against his eyes, his chest tight. History repeating itself. Downstairs, Thomas Smith paced his study. He'd overheard the staff whispering in the hallway earlier that evening. Thought he wasn't listening. Thought he couldn't hear. The boy's blindness is a curse, one of them had murmured. Punishment for what happened to Mrs. Ford. Thomas had frozen mid-step. A curse. As if losing Florence wasn't punishment enough. As if watching Patrick live in darkness for 17 years wasn't hell already. He closed the study door and sank into his chair, his head in his hands. The guilt was a living thing now. It breathed when he breathed, ate when he ate, followed him into every room of this godforsaken house. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was his fault. All of it. The next morning, James found Patrick in the conservatory. I need to tell your father, James said carefully, about what I saw. He can get you help, real help. Patrick's reaction was immediate. Violent. No. His voice cracked. No doctors. Patrick. They poke. They cut. They hurt. Patrick's hands were shaking. They never help. They never believe me. I'm just a problem they can't solve. James's heart shattered. He knelt in front of Patrick, his own hands trembling now. What if I could help you? Patrick went still. You're not a doctor. No. I'm not. Silence hung between them. Heavy, fragile, terrifying. James thought about Lily. About the splinter. About the risk he'd taken that saved her sight. He thought about this job. The paycheck. The warnings from Mr. Graves and Mrs. Henley. Do your job. Don't interfere. Don't get ideas. But Patrick was in pain. Real, constant, unbearable pain. And James was the only person who believed him. He could stay silent. Keep his head down. collect his pay and disappear. Or he could do what no one else had the courage to do. Let me think about it, James whispered. But they both knew he'd already decided. It happened 3 days later. James was carrying linens down the east corridor when he heard the sound. A muffled thud, then nothing. His blood went cold. He dropped everything and ran. Patrick was on the floor, curled on his side on the Persian rug, both hands pressed against his face. His body was rigid, trembling violently. No sound came from his mouth, but James could see it. The silent scream trapped in his throat, the agony written across every muscle. Patrick. James dropped to his knees, his hands shaking. Patrick, I'm here. The boy couldn't respond. Could barely breathe. James had seen pain before. On the streets. In shelters. In his sister's eyes. But this was different. This was torture. After what felt like an eternity, Patrick's body went limp. His breathing slowed. The trembling eased into exhausted shudders. James helped him sit up, his own heart hammering against his ribs. Patrick's voice came out broken. Raw. If something's there. He swallowed hard. Take it out. Please. James stared at him. Patrick. I can't do this anymore. Tears slid down Patrick's face. I can't. Please. James felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. This wasn't a splinter. This was deeper. More dangerous. If he failed, if he hurt Patrick worse, there would be no going back. But if he did nothing, Patrick would keep suffering. Your father. He's at a board meeting in the city. Won't be back until tomorrow. Patrick's unseeing eyes turned toward James. It's just us. Just us. James closed his eyes. God help me. Night fell like a curtain. James moved through the mansion like a ghost, his heart in his throat. The medical wing was on the second floor, sterile, organized, locked. But not well locked. He found the tweezers in a drawer marked surgical instruments. Stainless steel. Thin. Precise. He took them. Back in the service kitchen, he boiled water until steam filled the small room. Submerged the tweezers. Scrubbed his hands until they were raw. Then he climbed the stairs to Patrick's room. The boy was sitting in a leather chair by the window, his hands folded in his lap. Waiting. Are you sure? James asked, his voice barely audible. Patrick nodded. James set everything on the table. Boiled water, clean cloth, the tweezers wrapped in sterile gauze. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He knelt in front of Patrick and tilted his face toward the lamplight. For a moment, neither of them moved. James closed his eyes. He hadn't prayed in years. Not since the night they took Lily. Not since he stopped believing anyone was listening. But now the words came. Please. Please let me help him. Please don't let me fail. He opened his eyes. Patrick was looking in his direction, not seeing but somehow knowing. James picked up the tweezers. His hands steadied. He moved closer, the instrument hovering near Patrick's eye. One mistake could blind him permanently. One slip could cause irreparable damage. James's breath caught. Patrick's voice came soft in the darkness. I trust you. 3 words. They were enough. James leaned in, and the world held its breath. James's hands moved with impossible slowness. Every breath felt too loud. Every heartbeat a drumbeat counting down to disaster. He tilted Patrick's face toward the light, fingers gentle against the boy's jaw. Patrick gripped the arms of the leather chair, his knuckles white, his whole body trembling. But he didn't pull away. James angled the tweezers, searching for the dark mass he'd seen days before. The lamplight caught it, just barely, a glistening obstruction lodged deep beneath the eyelid. There. He slid the tweezers in. Slowly, carefully. Patrick's breath hitched. Stay still, James whispered. I've got you. The tweezers touched something solid. James felt resistance, dense, foreign, wrong. He hooked the edge of it. Patrick's body went rigid. James pulled. Gently at first. It didn't move. He adjusted his grip, applied more pressure. Patrick screamed. The sound tore through the room like a knife. Raw. Agonized. A sound 17 years of silence had been holding back. James's heart nearly stopped, but his hands didn't waver. Almost there. He pulled again, harder this time, feeling the obstruction shift, slide, resist. Then suddenly, it came free. A slick, dark mass slid onto the cloth in James's hand. Smooth. Unnatural. Stained with blood and fluid. Patrick gasped, his hands flying to his face. James dropped the tweezers, reaching for him. Patrick. But Patrick wasn't listening. His chest heaved. His hands trembled against his closed eyelid. Then, he opened his eye, and the world exploded. Light flooded in, brilliant, blinding, overwhelming. Shapes materialized out of darkness. Shadows became objects. Objects became real. Patrick's mouth opened. A sound somewhere between a sob and a shout tearing from his throat. I see something. James stared, his own eyes burning with tears. Patrick. I see. The door slammed open. Footsteps thundered across the floor like an avalanche. Thomas Smith stood in the doorway, his face white as death. His eyes swept the room. Tweezers on the table. Blood on the cloth. James kneeling beside his son. Patrick clutching his face, tears streaming, body shaking. What have you done? Thomas's voice was a roar. Fury and terror twisted together into something inhuman. He lunged forward. James tried to stand, to explain. But security was already there. Two men in black suits grabbed James by the arms, yanking him backward. No, wait, James struggled. He can see. Patrick can. Get him out of here. They dragged James toward the door. Patrick's head snapped up, his newly opened eye wild, unfocused, struggling to process shapes and movement. James. The word ripped from Patrick's throat, loud, desperate, heard. For the first time in his life, Patrick Smith screamed a name into the world and knew that sound had meaning. Don't take him. Please. James. But Thomas wasn't listening. He knelt beside Patrick, hands shaking as he reached for his son's face. And behind him, James was dragged into the hallway. His last sight of Patrick. A boy clutching his father's arm. Tears streaming down his face, one eye squeezed shut in pain. And the other open. Seeing light for the first time. Seeing the world. And screaming for the boy who gave it to him. The hospital was chaos. Patrick was wheeled through the emergency entrance, Thomas running beside the gurney, his hand gripping his son's. He can see, Patrick kept whispering, his voice raw from screaming. Dad, I can see shapes. I can see light. Thomas's throat was too tight to respond. Doctors swarmed. Ophthalmologists. Neurologists. Specialists yanked from their evening rounds. They shone lights into Patrick's eyes. Took measurements. Asked impossible questions. How long has he had partial vision? He hasn't, he's been blind since birth. Sir, his right eye is responding to visual stimuli. Something changed. Recently. Thomas's mind reeled back to the scene in Patrick's room. The blood. The tweezers. The homeless boy with shaking hands. What have you done? His own words echoed like an accusation he couldn't take back. They took scans. MRI. CT. Every imaging test the hospital had. Thomas paced the hallway outside, his hands trembling, his heart a war between hope and terror. An hour later, the chief surgeon emerged, Dr. Raymond Chen, a man Thomas had paid tens of thousands to over the years. His face was ashen. Mr. Smith. His voice was careful. Controlled. We need to talk. Thomas followed him into a private consultation room. Dr. Chen set a file on the table. Opened it. Inside scans. Dated years ago. Patrick's name at the top. And there, circled in red on a scan from when Patrick was 12, a clearly visible obstruction lodged beneath the lower eyelid. Thomas stared at it. His vision blurred. This. His voice came out strangled. This was visible. Dr. Chen wouldn't meet his eyes. It appears previous examinations noted an anomaly, but what? Silence. And then Thomas understood. The puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. Years of appointments. Experimental treatments. Specialists flown in from across the world. Procedures that went nowhere. Medications that did nothing. Keep the billionaire paying. Stretch the treatments. Milk him dry. Thomas's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair, his hands covering his face. They'd seen it. They'd known. And they'd buried it. Because a cured patient doesn't keep writing checks. Get out, Thomas whispered. Mr. Smith. Get out. Dr. Chen fled. Thomas sat alone in the sterile room, his entire world collapsing around him. His son had suffered for years. And the people he'd trusted, paid, begged for help, had let it happen. While a homeless boy with nothing saw what they refused to see. James sat in the security office, wrists cuffed to a metal chair. He stared at the floor, replaying every moment. Patrick's scream. The blood. Thomas's fury. I ruined everything. He tried to help. Tried to do what no one else would. And now Patrick was in the hospital. Maybe hurt worse. Maybe permanently damaged. James closed his eyes, tears burning behind his lids. I'm sorry, Patrick. The door burst open. Thomas Smith stood in the doorway. His eyes were red. His face was wet with tears. James looked up, bracing for rage. But Thomas crossed the room and dropped to his knees in front of him. James froze. Thomas's voice broke. I'm sorry. James stared, unable to speak. I should have protected my son. Thomas's hands shook. I should have listened. I should have seen. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. And I should have believed you. The words hung in the air like a prayer. You saved him, Thomas whispered. You gave him what I couldn't. And for the first time in 4 years, James let himself cry. Patrick woke to softness. Not the familiar softness of his bed at home, mapped by years of touch and memory. This was different. Sterile. Clinical. The sheets too stiff, the pillow too flat. But something else was different too. Light. Not the abstract concept he'd learned about in books. Not the warmth he felt on his skin when he stood near windows. Actual light. Filtering through his eyelids. Soft. Gray. Real. His breath caught. Slowly, terrified it might disappear, Patrick opened his eyes. The world was blurry. Shapes without edges. Shadows that moved and shifted. Colors bleeding into each other like watercolors left in the rain. But it was something. After 17 years of absolute darkness, it was everything. A shape moved beside him. Large. Familiar in the way it breathed, the way it smelled like expensive cologne and old guilt. Patrick. His father's voice. Closer than usual. Patrick turned his head toward the sound. The shape solidified slightly, a face still blurred, but there. Eyes. A nose. A mouth moving. Patrick, can you see me? Patrick's throat tightened. He tried to focus, squinting against the light that suddenly felt too bright, too much. But he could see the outline. Could see the tears on his father's face catching the dim hospital light. He nodded. Thomas made a sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Patrick blinked, trying to adjust. Trying to make sense of shapes and distances his brain had never learned to process. Then he looked past his father. Toward the door. Toward the empty space where he knew someone should be. Where's James? Thomas froze. Patrick. Where is he? Patrick's voice grew urgent. I need to see him. Please. Thomas's hand squeezed Patrick's. I'll get him. James stood outside the hospital room, his heart hammering. The handcuffs were gone. Physical therapy taught him to process shapes. Occupational therapy helped him navigate a world that suddenly had depth and color. Some days were overwhelming. Too much light, too much movement, his brain struggling to catch up. But other days were miracles. The first time he saw a sunset, he cried. The first time he saw his mother's portrait, he stood in front of it for an hour. The first time he saw his own reflection, he laughed, because he looked like her. 6 months later, Patrick and James sat on the mansion's back terrace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold that Patrick was still learning the names for. It's beautiful, Patrick whispered, his eyes fixed on the horizon. James smiled. Yeah, it is. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light shift and change. Patrick's voice came soft. Before you came, I thought darkness was all I'd ever know. James glanced at him. Patrick's profile was outlined in golden light, his expression peaceful in a way it never had been before. I thought I'd spend my whole life trapped, Patrick continued. That no one would ever really see me. James's throat tightened. But you did, Patrick said. You saw me when everyone else looked away. James looked down at his hands, hands that had once stolen to survive, that had trembled while holding tweezers over Patrick's eye, that had been cuffed and accused, hands that had saved a life. Sometimes, James said quietly, the people with nothing give the most. Patrick turned to him, his vision still adjusting but clear enough to see James's face, to see the boy who had given him the world. Thank you, Patrick whispered. James nodded, unable to speak. They turned back to the sunset together. And as the last rays of light stretched across the sky, Patrick Smith saw the sun, fully, completely, magnificently, for the first time in his life. The darkness was finally gone. And in its place, everything.